Welcome to our next session at the AURP International Conference. This session is Healthy Buildings, Healthy Air, Happy Tenants. So in 1943, a biocontainment cabinet was built at Fort Detrick, Maryland to create a safer lab environment. This federal effort led to the development of the American Biological Safety Association and the creation of the BSL ratings and protocols for life science labs that some of us have heard or deal with, like BSL-1s, BSL-2s, and other biosafety labs. Let's fast forward to 1993 at the American Institute of Architects headquarters building in Washington, D.C., where over 60 firms and nonprofits founded the U.S. Green Building Council, U.S. GBC, and green building standards have been adopted into municipal building codes. And those of us in the development community know about LEED standards, and they're quite accepted around the country and increasingly around the globe. So what's going to happen with healthy buildings and air standards inside of facilities? The International Well Building Institute has been leading an effort to create a global rating system that can improve comfort, drive better choices, and generally enhance health and wellness in buildings. So right now, 90% of our time is spent indoors. And when it gets cold, the number goes up to 95%. And it appears virus transmission rates are much higher indoors than outdoors. So what are the standards? How can we use new technologies, and how can we tweak existing technologies to improve the air that we breathe in our workplaces? And as our workplaces becomes our homes, we want to talk a little bit about improving home health air in our homes as well. So we have a great panel. We have three speakers here. We have Jessica Rose Cooper on the Well faculty, and she's Chief Commercial Officer for the International Well Building Institute. We have Scott Livingston, Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Livingston Securities, LLC. And we have Jerry Scanlon, Executive Vice President of Bowl & Train, located in the Mid-Atlantic region where I live. So we're going to have each of our speakers talk a little bit about their organizations, their experience with this topic, and then we're going to engage in some panel discussion. And if you have questions, send them on to the chat, and we'll try to get to those questions. And we end promptly at 4 o'clock. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Jessica to lead off the discussion about her role at the Well Building Institute. Jessica.
Excellent. Thanks, Brian and Scott, Jerry. Great to be on the panel with you today. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're calling in from today or what time it may be you're listening to this recording. Either way, my name is Jessica, and I'm the Chief Commercial Officer at the International Well Building Institute, where our mission is really quite simple. It's purely to improve health as we look at it for buildings, people, as well as businesses. So our aim is to improve building health, human health, and the health of the businesses that we operate within these healthy buildings that have healthier people. We have a holistic standard, as Brian mentioned, the Well Building Standard, and that standard itself covers 10 distinct concepts, ranging from air quality and water quality to improving thermal comfort and acoustical comfort, but also looking at ways to improve healthy eating, improving movement throughout the day, improving social cohesion and a sense of community health, and also looking at mental health, sort of a whole range of things that we can do in our buildings and within our businesses to improve human health outcomes. The standard itself covers a number of different strategy types. So we do look at the way design interventions and the way that we construct buildings can support human health. We also look at building operations and maintenance-based policies, and we look at people-based policies, like policies that your HR team may set or your workplace wellness team may set. And then finally, we really look to improve performance outcomes, measured both in terms of how the building is performing. So we will measure things like air quality and water quality, acoustics and lighting. But we also measure human performance outcomes through surveys and other types of data that help us understand that we're actually improving human health outcomes through the standard. Our original work it really did look at this holistic approach, and there's a number of different ways to earn recognition through the Well Building Standard, primarily by achieving full certification by following that holistic protocol. And there are also ways through your enterprise to achieve a well portfolio score, to really take a more incremental approach and really look more around benchmarking and making incremental improvements over time. But what we found over the last 7-8 months is that really understanding the way that our buildings and our businesses can support human health have never been more important. As the pandemic has swept across the world, I think all of us as individuals, as professionals, as business owners are asking, what can we do to support the fight against COVID? And we at IWBI asked ourselves the very same thing, given that all of our work is focused on improving human health and really understanding health issues that arise within buildings. So we put our 2020 planning on hold, sort of the things that we had originally set out to do at the beginning of the year, and decided to pivot in response to the virus and go back to what we do best, which is convening our community and subject matter experts really outside of our organization to understand how we could set evidence-based strategies to support in the fight against COVID. So we set up a task force and also engaged with our project teams and our clients to understand the latest and greatest research, as well as the best strategies that were out there to create operational policies and protocols that can help prevent against acute health issues, so immediate and serious health threats, many of which stem from infectious diseases. So our work was very much focused on COVID, but we were thinking a little bit more broadly than that as well, wanting to be relevant longer term into the future. And what we learned was that we could create a pretty robust approach to preparing buildings for a post-COVID world. And we launched what we call the health safety rating, the Well Health Safety Rating, which is basically a subset of criteria from that more holistic well building standard, which focuses on acute health issues that can be solved through building operations and maintenance. And I'm sure you all in the audience, and Brian too, have a lot of questions about specifically what's included in the rating. So I won't go into too much detail here, but it really does cover everything from cleaning and sanitization procedures to emergency preparedness programs, providing health service resources, good ways to communicate the policies that are in place, so on and so forth. Even as a subset, it's a quite holistic approach. So we are seeing adoption across many different sector types around the globe already. We launched the program at the end of July. Some of the more iconic facilities that have achieved the rating so far are Yankee Stadium and Empire State Building. I'm from New York City, so those two ring close to my heart, being in the Big Apple. But really the goal is that project teams follow this holistic approach, and then upon achieving all of those evidence-based strategies, get a seal that can help bring confidence to people who are entering the building that rigorous policies and protocols have been implemented to protect against acute health issues. So I'll pause there and pass it on to the next speaker, and looking forward to the dialogue.
Thanks. Scott, I know you work a lot in emerging technologies, and he has an amazing webcast that I encourage you guys to sign up. You learn a lot. He has amazing speakers. But Scott, why don't turn us over to you to talk about what you're doing at Livingston Securities in terms of investing in some of these more emerging technologies to help address these issues of COVID-19.
Thank you, Brian. I appreciate it. And thank you, Jessica and Jerry. I'm happy to share the stage with you. You know, I've been involved with the Association of University Research Parks for many years. Just to give you a background, I run a boutique investment bank and broker-dealer, Livingston Securities. My calling card is that I'm the king of nanotechnology on Wall Street, and I have been since 2003. I've been involved in emerging technologies my whole career on Wall Street, starting in 1989. In the early 2000s, when I started focusing on the nanotechnology revolution, one of the things that I saw that was extremely important, and the best advice I could give people, is connect with your local innovation economy. And the Association of University Research Parks is an extremely important part of that advice, because there is no better way to connect with your local innovation economy than to get involved with your local university research park. So once again, thank you, Brian, for your leadership and for the work that you do. And I hope that this message goes out far and wide as we go into these important years. So If you were a nanotechnology enthusiast in the mid 2000s, one of the main things you talked about that you heard people talking about back then was vaccines, viruses, super rapid, super accurate diagnostics, and other technologies to deal with pandemics. But in 2006, for example, the great Kleiner Perkins started a pandemic venture capital fund, and then they closed it down in 2006 because nobody cared. Okay. Nowadays, nobody cares about anything else in healthcare but super rapid diagnostics, vaccines, viruses, and other things. And so it's kind of like, Noah's Ark, right? If you're building a boat in the sunshine, people might laugh at you. But, if you're trying to build a boat in the rain, you're going to drown. If you also spoke at these nanotechnology conferences, and I think I did speak at one of the AURP conferences back in the late 2000s, what you spoke about was coatings, surfaces, viruses, antibacterial and antiviral, HVAC systems, toilet technology, water infrastructure, lighting, indoor air quality, and the ability to turn your casino floor, your hotel lobby, or your university research park headquarters into air quality similar to that of a semiconductor fab or a hospital operating room. And that's because technologists had developed those capabilities 10 and 12 years ago, but guess what? Nobody cared. And so I spent a lot of time drinking at conferences right at the airport lobby after the conference with people who said, I have this wonderful technology that can clean buildings and nobody cares. Well, guess what? Everybody cares now. COVID is a war on being indoors. COVID is a war on 1,000 years of buildings technologies, and COVID is winning. The most important thing that I can suggest to everybody, and then I'll stop, is there are a tremendous amount of new technologies that are coming out to fight COVID in buildings. Many of them are garbage. Money is being spent out there right now on products that don't get the job done. More importantly, if you've been around the block a few times and have done this, you know who has the technologies, the patents, the approvals, the scalability of manufacturing and other things that allow the best technologies to be implemented at scale. And the biggest concern that we have today is that budgets are increasing, but are not being spent appropriately. And so our old friends, a number of them who, nobody would return their phone call a year ago, are now seeing their phone lines blowing up. And that's good, but, they need help, right? So we are helping a number of our old friends get the word out there about the right technologies, about who has the right solutions. And I invite and advise anybody to contact me. You can look me up on LinkedIn, or you can get me through Brian or what have you, to talk about specific technologies for your location or for what you're looking to do. But we know a lot about this area, and so I'm glad to be a part of this panel. I'll stop there and pass it to Jerry, but I'm available for questions.
Thanks. Jerry, give us a little background on Bolin, because I'm from the DC area. You guys are extremely well known in the Mid-Atlantic region, but may not be as well known across the country or internationally.
Yeah, thanks, Brian, and thanks for having us here today. And glad to be with you, Jessica and Scott. Yeah, Boland is a sales and service representative for Trane Air Conditioning in the Washington, D.C. market. So we represent kind of the boots on the ground with this kind of stuff, and have been a long time business operator here in the Washington, D.C. area. Matter of fact, we're celebrating our 60th year this year, which we're fairly proud of. Obviously, not much of a celebration with COVID, so we've had to postpone our celebration until things open up a little bit. But at any rate, certainly we've seen a lot of interest in this particular area. We typically deal with indoor environments a lot, and most recent, people typically concerned about comfort, temperature, humidity, and even acoustics and those kind of things. Certainly some of the things that Jessica talked about. But certainly this issue has certainly brought a focus on indoor air quality. And not that it hasn't been important, but it hasn't been certainly as important as it is now. And certainly we find lots of interest in what people can do. And certainly ASHRAE, which is the American Society of Heating and Refrigerating and Air Conditioning Engineers, has guidelines out there, as does CDC and WHO. And they're pretty much aligned with some of the things that you can do. I also echo Scott's sentiments. There's lots of stuff out there and people are getting bombarded with information. And in some respects, there's a paralysis because people don't know what to do because there's so much information, some of it good, some of it not so good. And fundamentally, they're just trying to do the right thing and do the best thing they can. And so that's part of what we see. Also, too, to your comment, Brian, when we look at what this does, and even what the Well Institute started to do many years ago, is when you look back at LEED kind of focused a lot on making buildings better for the environment. So we did a lot of stuff around the energy of a building and siting and so on and so forth. Well, kind of took it the other way and say, wait a minute, let's look at the people in the building and what can we do to make the indoor environment better. Now, this issue really provides tension between those two things because a lot of those things that we do that can make the indoor environment better, not only do they cost money up front maybe to do, but also energy costs. And energy costs can and will go up in buildings if you adopt some of these things that are being recommended by ASHRAE and CDC and such. So it's going to renew that tension between indoor air quality and energy, and maybe even make energy efficiency even more important. Because if we're going to be using more of it because we're trying to keep our buildings well ventilated, then what we're using better be very efficient. So I'm glad to join in here today. Look forward to the dialogue and questions and wherever this may go.
So, to all three of you, I mentioned, LEED standards and, you had municipal governments adopting them and, people, it was sort of a point of pride. I got a LEED platinum building or whatever. Are we going to have municipalities developing health standards? So I see a symbol or something, not just the Well Building Institute, but a municipality or New York City certifies this building is now healthy or clean. Are we going to get to that ever? Anyone?
Yes.
I think maybe Jessica's what that can answer this.
Yeah.
Yeah. So from our perspective, our goal is to put forward the best evidence and the best research, as well as the best strategies to enable organizations to invest in ways to support human health. You can't design your way out of COVID. You can't guarantee human health if they're in a specific building. There are way too many variables that go into how healthy a person is. That can't be controlled within one building that they may spend a portion of their time in. But what we can do is make all of the right decisions to enable that person to thrive as much as they possibly can when they are in that space. And that is our goal. And we do look holistically at health. So I talked a little bit about holistic strategies, but those holistic strategies are aimed at really optimizing a holistic perspective on health. And what I mean by that is that we are looking to improve physical health. So things like particulates in the air or VOCs in the air will have an impact on your physical health outcomes. But we also look to improve mental health, which could be impacted by things that are in the air like CO2 and other factors, but can also be impacted by access to natural light and biophilia, connection with nature, many other things. And then we look to improve social determinants of health as well, social health, which could be a connection with the community and other ways to improve community health more broadly. So, from our perspective, there's a lot of different strategies that can be put into place to enable people to thrive. We can't necessarily guarantee that a building is continuously operating in a healthy way, or a person is always going to be optimized from a health standpoint if they're in that building, but we can put a seal on a building that says you have met this holistic approach and you are at least benchmarking performance at key points throughout time so that you don't go too long before identifying an issue and looking to resolve it. So I think that was a workaround to your answer, Brian, but I think in general, yes, we can aim towards health. We can't necessarily guarantee health.
Yeah, it's like, I'm paraphrasing a Harvard faculty member from the public health department. He said, your building operator may be more responsible for your health than your doctor because of, what building managers can do or can't do, right? So Scott, to me,
well, before you get into that, let me also give a just a 30-second here.
Yeah.
This is the life or death issue for all real estate owners. If you have a business that's based on somebody entering a building, you are at peril right now. I don't care, New York was in phase 4 opening in September and getting, a couple hundred cases a month, a day or something, very low numbers. And Park Avenue was still a ghost town. Nobody's going to the movies, nobody's going to school, nobody's going anywhere if they're not confident that the building is safe. So whether there's a specific standard or not, I think that building owners would be wise to advertise, to not only spend money, but advertise the fact that they're spending money. Because if you have 2 buildings right next to each other and one of them is, showing that they've bought all the filters and done all the things that they can do, and the other one hasn't, that's going to be reflected in rent rolls and occupancy buildings. And, the one building will be in business and the other will be burning itself down to try and collect the insurance money, because that's where we are in most parts of the country right now in terms of building occupancy.
Yeah, Brian, I would just add too that I think one of the things that separates, I think, this from the LEED movement, and it took roughly about 10 years for LEED to really be adopted into a lot of the local codes and such that you referenced. But there was no really compelling event with the whole LEED thing. But now there's been a compelling event, which is Scott described, and people are reacting to that compelling event. And a lot of what Jessica described is very proactive and long term. But there are people, like running around like chickens with their heads cut off, trying to figure out what are they going to do to get their building back open and get the people back in there.
So did we learn anything, from Legionella disease? I mean, that was an event that wasn't quite as impactful, but it clearly affected some people. What, Jerry, you guys have you had to deal with conventional equipment. What lesson did we learn from Legionella that we could apply to COVID-19, if any?
Well, you're right. That was a kind of a compelling event, but that seemed to be somewhat isolated. It was identified to being in cooling towers and that part of a building and that part of a system. So it was a little bit easier to focus on it, contain it, isolate it, and get to it. Whereas that's not the case with this particular thing, because it can be everywhere and everyone can be exposed to it just by the fact that you're in a building or around other people that may have been exposed. So that's one of the things that makes it so very, very different is it's just so uncertain and certain we're learning a lot, and we've come a long way in the last 5 to 6 months in what we've learned about it, and know some very basic things. And I know we've had some spikes here and there, but I think overall we've made a lot of progress, and people have certainly a better understanding of what it is we need to do to protect ourselves and such. So while they're similar, I see them being different just because of the potential infection from this is certainly a lot greater than what we saw from Legionella.
Yeah. So we're getting a couple of questions here in the chat. So what changes do we need to do for our HVAC systems? Increase more HEPA filters? I mean, is that going to work? Any talk on what specifically should we be doing with HVAC systems, since that's an expensive thing? And my guess is building owners, to Scott's point, some of them, it's hard to communicate what they're doing, and maybe the public doesn't know, what's effective versus what's not effective. So Jerry, I mean, you guys have been working this pretty seriously, I suspect.
Yeah, and in general, I mean, we tend to follow what the associations like ASHRAE and such advocate. And what ASHRAE is advocating is fairly simple and straightforward, at least in the near term. Certainly a lot of things Jessica talks about is maybe in the mid to long term. But one of the things they recommend is upgrading filters to a Mirv 13. Now that's just a rating. We don't have to get into a lot of what that rating means, but in general, the higher the number, the more effective the filter is at removing small particles. And the COVID is a fairly small particle. The virus is a fairly small particle. Most buildings have either like a Mirv 8, maybe a Mirv 10 type filter. So upgrading the filters is one of the first things that ASHRAE recommends. Now, when you do that, those filters have higher air pressure drop. So if you don't do something to maybe perhaps speed up your fans, then you could be moving less airflow through your building, which could have comfort issues. So that's the first thing. The second thing is bringing in more outside air and exhausting more. That's a simple dilution strategy. Just like being outdoors, we have less exposure because there's a lot more air around us and we're not so confined. Same thing, bring in more outside air, but that means you have to exhaust more outside air. that has the energy impacts. You have to make sure that you have enough cooling and heating available to even do that. And even if you have enough cooling and heating available to do that, it's going to cost you more to do that because you're ventilating your building more. But again, fairly simple, straightforward strategy to do that. And then also recommending a purge of the building. So you might purge the building at the end of the day or purge it in the morning before it's occupied, where you effectively just change the entire air in the building by bringing in outside air and exhausting all the air that's in. Again, cost to do that, meaning you've got to spend the energy to do that. But it's something that can be done to improve the indoor environment of the building. So those are some very basic, simple things. Now that sounds simple, but I mean, you don't have to run around and buy a lot of gizmos and do a bunch of stuff to do those very, very basic things. And those are the first things that we see people doing is implementing some of those kind of things. Now, there are some other kinds of technologies like air cleaning technologies where you can get to an effective Mirv 13 without the air pressure drop. And so we see interest in those kinds of technologies. And I separate air cleaning from filtration. And the way I describe to people is air cleaning, you typically have a power connection. You got to provide power to it to clean the air, whereas air filters are totally passive. It's a media, and the tighter we make the media, then the more we can catch. And HEPA, you're right, as you mentioned, Brian, is one of the most effective filters at catching stuff, but also they have the highest pressure drop. And there are companies that make little self-contained filter fan units that you can wheel into a room and turn it on. And the purpose is for it to circulate air in that room to catch and remove whatever small particulate may be in that room that could perhaps be COVID virus.
So Scott,
let me just kind of take a second or two to address that as well, so that everybody knows what's coming down the pike. The problem with the air filters and the Mirv 13 compliance is that it's a massive expense, especially for smaller entities to upgrade to Mirv 13 compliance. It's a big deal in the hotel industry. The big hotels can afford it, but the little ones can't. But there are technologies.
Not to mention, Scott, some equipment can't even accommodate that kind of filter.
Right, exactly. It's a big issue. There are technologies coming out now that are coatings for the filters that will allow you to upgrade to Mirv 13 compliance just by switching out the air filter. That's been studied and with high quality studies and is about to be implemented and introduced into the markets now. The other thing that I'll point out is that the air filters and the heating and ventilation and everything is only as good as the people that walk into the room, because if somebody walks in and coughs or sneezes or sings or whatever, you're back to square one. So the HEPA filters really don't work either. Again, they provide some coverage and they're useful, but it's difficult to provide a full room coverage with a HEPA filter. So that's a real problem. One thing that I would suggest everybody look at is 222 nanometer UV lamps. That's where the action is. Coatings on the filters, nano coatings on the filters, 222 nanometer UV lamps, and nano paints that can kill COVID on touch and everything are what's coming down the pike. And it's coming, and it has to come fast, because the COVID numbers are going back up again all over the country. So it is needed.
Yeah, Scott, you hinted something, and I think there may be some ongoing debate and discussion about, well, do we need to be concerned about the air or surfaces or both? And I think, at least from what I've been able, and I only know what I read. I'll say up front, I'm no doctor, so I only know what I read. But it seems to be that the most concern is about near contact of aerosols, so stuff in the air. There's also surfaces, and there are also technologies out there to clean surfaces. And UV is one that's very good at cleaning surfaces. But UV is not so good at cleaning stuff that's moving, stuff that's moving through the air. Matter of fact, I think the Well Institute, they have UV lights that you recommend putting in air handlers and shining them towards coils and drain pans. And that's great at killing the stuff that's growing on those coils and drain pans. But the stuff that's flying by through the air, it's not real effective on. So that's one of the ongoing tensions is it surface or is it airborne? I think we've kind of focused on airborne with the masks and such. And that's one of the other things about, again, the HVAC systems. People have been looking a lot at HVAC systems, and for good measure, because the potential to circulate stuff. But from what I've seen and read about HVAC systems, the thing to be concerned is really about the airflow in the room, meaning that knowing that it's aerosols that are in the air, just the perhaps depending on where a diffuser may be and what the direction of airflow may be, those aerosols may get blown on someone directly. But in terms of recirculating them from one room to the next, I'm not sure that we have much knowledge or experience where that is occurring. That's not to say it's not occurring or wouldn't occur, but there hasn't been a lot of effort from what I've seen in that. But it has been the aerosol and also the surfaces that you described.
Jessica, what about more research in this area? Is well building doing that?
Well, absolutely. We're always looking at the latest and greatest research, and our standard itself evolves over time. So we have the ability to add new strategies and new solutions into the standard really in a real-time basis, which is great. I did want to add on to what Jerry and Scott were saying when really it sort of sum up, I think, both of their points, which is that there's no silver bullet solution to this. It's in the air. It's being aerosolized. It's also on the surfaces if the virus is being passed to surfaces. And from my perspective, I think it's really important to remember all of the levers that you as an individual or within your professional jurisdiction have to pull, and then thinking about how to pull those levers and what are the right levers to pull at any given point in time, right? So these crises are raising building factors that affect our health as it relates to viral transmission. And so we're all very much focused on cleaning protocols that can support the removal of those viruses from surfaces. We're really looking at mechanical systems and how we can adjust those to mitigate the spread through air. And that's great. And in many ways, that's going to make our buildings healthier in the future to prevent against other types of health threats that can arise within buildings. And not only do you have to think about what's within your scope as a professional, but really what's within your ability based on the existing building conditions that you're working with, the budget that you're working with, the schedule that you have to deal with. So there's a lot of factors, obviously, that are going to go into you deciding what are the best strategies to put in place now, what levers do I have to pull, and when do I need to pull those levers? And that's the last point I wanted to make, is sort of going back to some of Jerry's opening remarks about the tug between energy efficiency and human health outcomes. From my perspective, they're inextricably linked. And we have to be focusing on optimizing for human health and for environmental health in the long term. And if you pull a lever to address what's needed right now, because we're dealing with a global pandemic on COVID-19, and leave that lever pushed down for all of eternity, you're going to waste energy. You don't need that lever necessarily operating full time at full capacity for the rest of the operational hours of that building. But if you're pushing and pulling your levers based on what the current challenge at hand is, or the way that you need to optimize your building right here and right now, you can dial certain things up to protect human health, and then you can dial certain things back when they're overkill so that you can protect the environment. And I think that more dynamic way of operating our buildings and maintaining our buildings is really the best way to optimize for both human health and environmental health outcomes.
So I'm in Maryland, right? So we got, I think, under warp speed, we got $5 billion, like 4 different companies in Maryland, have gotten money from BARDA and other things to help, create vaccines. But on this topic of healthy air, Jerry mentioned ASHRA, which is a standard setting, and it's, an industry group. Do we need more? And I don't know who does the research. Is it CDC? Is it EPA, Department of Energy? Who really does these fundamental research on what works? Maybe not to address this pandemic, but is it aerosol? Is it surface? And it seems like we don't really have. There doesn't seem to be that much research going into those really important issues, so that the real estate industry doesn't totally collapse. That Scott was sort of hinting at. That's just, I don't know, because it seems like it is kind of diffused among different parts of the federal government.
There's actually massive research going on right now. Let's just remember that this was like a switch that got turned on in March or April, right? When it became clear that COVID was going to be such a big problem. So all of a sudden, this back burner research that was a small, tiny part of the budget at Harvard and Johns Hopkins and other universities all around the country turned into the frontline priority, but it takes some time to get it done. So we're only about 6 months into this crisis. And so I think you're going to see a lot more research. You're already starting to see it, being published, and a lot more will be published about technologies and solutions in the next couple of months. Again, it's a race, so a couple of months is a long time, but it's coming.
And Brian, I might offer too, we talked about filters, which is a capturing technology. We've talked about UV, which is really a killing technology, if you will. And there's one other kind of technology that's out there. I'll categorically speak about it in terms of creating ions which attack the virus. So, it's a chemical thing, and there's different technologies that create these ions and disperse these ions, typically applied in the space. Again, it's a space treatment, not a treatment that would back an air handler, but there are no standards, no industry association, no standards for testing and rating those things. So one person will come in and tell you, well, you need 3 of them, and somebody else will say, well, I can do it with 2, and somebody else, well, I can do it with 1, and nobody really knows whether any of them will do anything or what they're doing. And that's a real challenge. It's a real problem. And some of those may produce ozone, some of those may produce hydrogen peroxide. So there's other things that get introduced into the space. In fact, there was a well-known case a number of years ago where I forget the store at the mall that was selling the little ozone generators as air cleaners. And ultimately they had to take them off the market because they were producing ozone, which is harmful to people. So it's a real challenge. But I support Scott that since this button's been pushed, we're going to see a lot of interest and a lot of activity at trying to establish, do those things really work? How do we rate them? How do we qualify them? And so people can apply them intelligently and really get the benefit of what they're trying to get out of them.
Yeah.
So, go ahead, Jim.
There's a solution out there, which is human behavior and managing expectations around human behavior. And I think, Brian, you might have said something in passing a few minutes ago. As soon as someone walks in there and sneezes without a mask on, you can have the best, air ventilation rates, the best filtration in place, and that virus is getting aerosolized and spreading around that room. So I think, setting guidelines around what the expectations are for people wearing personal protective equipment, potentially temporary de-densification within spaces, so that even if you don't have the capacity to increase airflow or increase filtration, you're decreasing density, let's say, in a more densely occupied space, so that the airflow that is being provided is better diluting the particles that people are breathing and spreading around the space. So sort of remembering that human behavior has a huge role to play here. And to your point around the various research bodies, all of those organizations you listed are doing research. And I think we see it as our job at IWBI to sift through all of that and take the best of everything and put it into that easily digestible, easy to apply protocol, really, that enables you to think more holistically about all the different levers that you can pull to create a more optimized space.
I'd just like to add, just for a quick second here, this is a massive opportunity for university research parks in a number of different ways, right? First of all, because you are in all the universities already, right? You have the real estate and you have the buildings for people to, experiment on, especially because many research parks that I know of have open space too. So you may have filled space that people are occupying and working in, but there's a lot of open space to try new technologies and test new technologies. And then the other thing about the AURP, I think that really has a great opportunity is, if we are going to de-densify, and if we are going to have more remote, nobody commutes into the city anymore, but JP Morgan's going to have big offices in Westchester, Long Island, and New Jersey, right? Well, the university research parks have the opportunity to host and bring in, large companies and partners and everything in new and innovative ways, and in ways that maybe they weren't part of your charter when you started, but flexibility is the watchword here. So I think there's a great role for AURP to play in this whole new world.
No, you're right, Scott. I mean, we have these peer-to-peer calls with people that are, operating and managing research parks, and how to continue to attract tenants and how to continue to ensure confidence in the tenants is something all of our members are wrestling with. So what, and maybe Jerry and Jessica and Scott, what just low cost things? I mean, is it as simple as making sure your filters are changed, or what are some low-cost things? We've been talking about biopolar ionization and things. Those are obviously very expensive. What would you give the people running some research park? What are just some low-cost things that probably they're doing, but let's just make sure they're doing? Jerry, what do you say?
I mean, I'll go back to come on something earlier. I mean, simple things like appreciate Scott's comment about filters, upgrading filters, and some of that is I've even heard of places around the country where just the availability of filters is getting to be a challenge because everybody's running around trying to get Mirv 13 filters. But there are other technologies that you can use to get to an effective Mirv 13, and then bring in more outside air, exhaust more outside air. Again, to Jessica's point, you don't want to do that forever. I mean, eventually this thing will get behind us, but at least in the near term, you're almost trying to create an indoor environment like outdoor environment where you dilute the indoor space. Obviously, that means all your equipment has to be operating, your controls have to be operating, and the operators have to know what they're doing. And Scott made that point earlier, that we're only as good as the people that are trying to do all this stuff. But that's some pretty simple, straightforward stuff that we've been advising people on really since June, when they were kind of in a panic and thinking they had to go out and spend a bunch of money to do stuff. And this is the finger in the dike kind of stuff. But I don't say that to make light of it, because it's fairly simple, straightforward stuff that is fairly easy to implement without spending a whole lot of money unnecessarily. And then you can decide, well, what other technologies do I want to invest in for the longer term?
So Jessica, yes, you have very much of an integrated approach, and your emphasis on mental health as well as the physical health is something I think I'm reading some of the chats, and some of our members are very appreciative of that kind of integrated approach. So we're almost out, but I want to talk a little bit about the new workplace is what? The home. So
Hey Brian, can I just say something before you do?
Sure. Yeah.
There's FEMA money available, especially if you are a nonprofit or a critical infrastructure. And the FEMA money is available by year end. I'm not sure if it's going to be expanded, contracted, whatever in the new year. But if you want information, I'll send it to Brian and he can share it or what have you. But there's FEMA money available that can increase your investment by a 2 or 3x. So get some of that FEMA money right away.
Oh, yeah, no, that's great. Thanks, Scott. I wasn't aware of that. That's great. So just a couple comments because we're winding down here. Again, the new workplace, to Scott's point, is your house, right? I mean, people aren't going into the office. So what should we be thinking about our house? Obviously, it's easy to open a window in a house, maybe not so easy in an office. Jerry, what are people worrying about COVID in their homes?
I would think probably even more so. Obviously, we spend a lot more time now. Now, fortunately about your home, you just have a little bit more control about who's coming in and maybe where they've been before they've gotten there and such. So in some respects, it's a little bit more of a shelter. But the same kind of technologies we talked about here today are available at the residential level, down at that level. Matter of fact, it's probably a lot more prolific down at that level because people maybe have had allergies or whatever else, and they've been in that indoor environment, so they've applied different kinds of technologies already to address that. So, but I think you're right. We're going to see the same kind of interest in doing it in our homes. We're all spending more time in our homes, including now work, besides just sleeping and having our meals and such there. So.
All right, Jessica, last comments. We have about 1 minute and 31 seconds.
Yes, absolutely. Well, and Jerry, I have purchased a small air purifier for my own home, much smaller area or volume, I should say, to filter. So the standalone purifier is effective. But I would say as we're spending much more time in our home offices, be thinking about the resources that we have in our actual offices that could be really useful in your home office. So getting beyond sort of COVID-19 is what do you need to support ergonomics? What do you need to support mental health? Like, do you have access to natural light, or where can you go throughout the day to make sure that you're getting some natural light? So just be thinking about that more holistic approach to health. And the well building standard is really meant more for commercial type of applications, but you can draw inspiration from it to help spruce up your home office with low, no cost interventions that can really make a huge difference.
Great. Scott, you're batting cleanup here.
No, I listen, Jerry and Jessica, thank you. I learned a lot from this, and I really hope to connect with you offline, for further conversation. I think Jessica made a good point about the home thing. We really what we're dealing with is at the home is, isolation and, not being able to connect with all of your peers and everything. And so it's a much more holistic thing when you're talking about home applications.
Well, great. So we've reached the conclusion of our session. Stay tuned for the next session, which is taking your incubator program to the next level, featuring Eric Smith, Executive Director at the University of Arizona Center for Innovation. Again, thank you to my panelists, and I'm sure there'll be further dialogue, and we'll send out linkages so you can connect with them. Thank you, panel, and stay tuned for the next session.